Anti-Black Gendered Violence by Sidney Hughes-Jackson and Josette Raper. The murder of Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor is a Black EMT who was shot and killed by Louisville police officers in March of 2020 during a botched raid of her apartment. September 2021, a grand jury indicted a former Louisville detective involved in the raid for wanton endangerment of neighbors whose apartment was hit when he fired without clear line of sight into the sliding glass patio door and window of Taylor's apartment. The botched raid was according to both statements made by police officers and forensic reports due to poor planning and reckless execution. The only report for the grand jury's conclusion was that officers had announced themselves before bursting in to Taylor's apartment was the account of a single witness whose statement was inconsistent. The case itself has been extremely slow, with little to no progress being made in getting justice for Breonna Taylor in comparison to the death of George Floyd, where the officers responsible were fired and charged very quickly. The history of Black gendered violence. The discussion in the video of African American women during slavery and freedom helped to shed some light on the everlasting issues that African American women faced and continue to face as they fight for their rights and freedoms. During the Civil War, the Army saw African American women as a problem and burdens while discouraging them from following troops. These women faced delocation, starvation, inadequate shelter and clothing, rampant disease, scarce burial to leave their children. It was thought that Black women did not feel pain and were born genetically tougher than other individuals, due to Thomas Jefferson writing his book that African American women prefer to mate with orangutans. Women have had to deal with the ramifications throughout history that they do not experience pain, proof that influential people throughout history have everlasting effects. The Memphis riots. Accusations after the war continued to grow against Black women of prostitution, lewd behavior, and disorderly conduct. Black women were constantly arrested and would be forced to bribe police officers out of being arrested for prostitution. How anti-Black gendered violence affects the analyzation of the murder of Breonna Taylor. Drawing parallels to the Lucy Stone case in the mid-1800s, Celia Stone to Breonna Taylor makes it increasingly clear that it has never been about justice or equality to the whites, only about the ways they can treat a person and a non-person. Lucy Stone was treated as a person in ways because she was given the opportunity to testify against her abuser and her rapist, but as a non-person because she never received justice. Celia the slave, a person because she could be raped by her owner, Robert Newsom, but a non-person because she was executed immediately after childbirth because she killed her owner by self-defense after she told him no, and he persisted. And the same can be said for Breonna Taylor. Her family did receive money, and a single officer was fired, and that is how she was treated as a person, but a non-person, she has yet to see justice. After the way the women were treated during the Memphis riots, it was justified as though their gender was different from white women. As we study the history of slavery, emancipated slaves to current-day citizens, it shows that the truth has always been twisted to make Black individuals the attacker, the criminal, and the person who asked for their treatment. When you read a document like this incident report and you see blatant misrepresentations that even suggest that Breonna Taylor wasn't hurt, that's injustice. That's an insult, and that's how LMPD's way of doing things the wrong way. And it needs to stop. It needs to stop now, said attorney Sam Aguar, who represents the Taylor family.
How can learning this history work to abolish anti-Black gendered violence? I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Some of my very good friends were killed by bombs. From the time I was very small, I remember the sounds of bombs exploding across the street and our house shaking. I remember my father having to have guns at his disposal at all times because of the fact that at any moment we might expect to be attacked. Angela Davis. Civil rights activist Angela Davis' accounts of her childhood spoke volumes to the lack of humanity given to Black bodies, no matter their age. And it is this act of stripping away humanity and the portrayal of Black bodies as subhuman entities whose lives are dispendable that allow for anti-Black gendered violence to continue to exist. For once there is the removal of anti-Blackness in society, then there will be the removal of anti-Black violence and in turn anti-Black gendered violence. Civil rights activist Tamika Mallory says, "We cannot look at this as an isolated incident. The reason buildings are burning are not just for our brother, George Floyd. They are burning because people here in Minneapolis are saying to people all across this nation, enough is enough." During the height of the BLM movement and protests of 2020 and 2021, Black Lives Matter protesters were often portrayed as animals, as if what was being protested for, the last lives of Black men, women, and children, didn't warrant an uproar. This is an example of how looking at history through an altered lens often results in cruel and dishonest justifications for violence against Black bodies, no matter the age or gender of the lives being stripped away. Phrases similar to, well, maybe if they didn't burn buildings, they wouldn't be killed, were often used as a way to be dismissive of those lives lost. In a way, victim blaming and taking focus away from the true issue, anti-Black violence. In conclusion, by reflecting on decades of trauma, abuse, and violence, we are able to see that Black women have never been treated as either of their Black male or white female counterparts. The intersection of both race and gender has worked against Black women since they were first enslaved, and that hasn't changed. The fact that their identity is made up of two marginalized groups, one of which is both marginalized and criminalized, makes the presence of anti-Black gendered violence inevitable. But by learning history through the lens of Black women and hearing first accounts of these events, we can eliminate the ability of others, historically white men, to whitewash history and paint these women in negative light or portray them in ways that are inhumane as a justification for the acts of violence committed against Black women. Looking at the case of Breonna Taylor through a lens that acknowledges the history of anti-Black gendered violence, you are able to grasp how Breonna Taylor's case differs very little from countless of Black women whose lives were stripped away from them at the hands of people who saw her and them as less than whole, who justified these actions by portraying Black women as animals, subhuman, who deserved it, and whose pain and suffering made no difference for better or for worse. But it is also through this lens that we are able to understand the importance of having Black female historians to tell the story of themselves and those who look like them correctly to decrease and hopefully one day abolish anti-Black gendered violence. Thank you.